So, hi Richard.
Hi.
Thanks for coming in today. Did I denote a South African accent there?
You do. Was born and bred there and have been in London for a while.
Okay.
So, and look after an EMEA business across Dubai, Asia, not Asia, but more kind of Arabia and Africa. So, yeah,
Fantastic.
good to be here today.
We very much welcome you here, and we're absolutely delighted to have you. And our listeners out there, when they listen to these types of podcasts, are dying for the inside track, the knowledge about what it is that you've done, who you are, how you've got there. But I think today is all about you and being able to tell us lots of things about what you think is going on. So if I can ask, sort of, you work for an organisation. Could you give us a little bit of information, background on that?
So I work for a business called Wunderman, and I head up a division within Wunderman that looks after data, customer data, insights and that sort of thing across analytics. We help clients in terms of consulting to understand how they collect and manage kind of customer and other data within their business. And then we get into more marketing and measurement and reporting and that sort of thing. So really what we're focusing on is a marketing aspect, and how clients can do better, more effective marketing and understand data and insights to be able to drive their businesses and growth forward.
Fantastic. And you talk about the marketing part of that. I think the majority of people today are quite aware of companies now wanting their data. They sort of feel that it's valuable. Do they feel that do individuals and consumers feel protected? Is there ways that they can be protected? Privacy?
It's quite interesting because we actually launched a whole lot of research at the end of 2021 around, and we termed it as in trust. But what it dealt with was people's confidence in terms of what they believe was happening with data, and as you can imagine, different kind of categories of business have different kind of perceptions within consumers. So if you take banking, for example, they actually have a high trust because you trust banks that they're going to do the right thing with the data because of their governance and their compliance, and they're under a lot more pressure than potentially a retailer or an airline, as an example. So depending on the category and the kind of vertical, depends on the level of trust that customers have, and that directly correlates to the level of trust that they have in terms of the data that they give away. What is becoming more interesting is that consumers are much more aware of what data they're sharing and how they're sharing that data. But it depends. It depends on age groups. It depends on location. It depends on all sorts of different factors in terms of that awareness. And then the other key factor that kind of counters that is when you start looking at the availability of what people would want access to. So if you think about a kind of a country that has a high cost of acquiring or using data, they happily give away their details purely to get access to data. So if you go into somewhere like Africa and you've got a Wi-Fi area, people happily sign up to the Wi-Fi and just give away their details.
Wow.
Whereas in a more sophisticated market like Europe or the UK, people are a lot more circumspect about what kind of data they're giving away, what kind of value they're getting back for giving away their data, and how they're managing it. So it depends on the sophistication, but there's so many other factors that potentially contribute back into that. And that's what people are playing on. They're like, what is that value creation in terms of why would you give me your data and what is the value that I'm going to give you back for it?
So is that just an education thing?
One, I think it's not just an education thing, but I think it's also how we've been conditioning consumers.
Okay.
So people are kind of going, I'm going to give you this back, but then what am I getting back? Am I getting a freebie or a voucher or, over time though, I think that is going to be an education thing because of what's happening within the market. So the way that companies have been able to track and activate and target consumers has really been through cookies. That's why you get all these cookie consents on websites that you keep clicking on to say, yes, I consent. It's so that they can actually engage with you. Now, it's not a bad thing, because you need cookies to some level to be able to activate e-commerce and to be able to track you through a website, because not everything is just purely on one platform. So you're going, as I move through the website and get to checkout, I can use cookies to kind of do that. But a lot of the time what was happening is that people were using those cookies to remarket and target people, and that was deemed as not necessarily being consensual. So what you are seeing now in terms of how people are kind of looking at it is that they're going, what is privacy versus consent versus ethics?
Wow.
And I'll unpack a little bit about each of those to give you. So if you look at privacy is around how are you protecting my data?
Yes.
And obviously within the EU and within the UK, you have the right to forget. So what happens if I come back to you and I go, I don't want any more communication, I don't want any more engagement with you? What are they doing to be able to make sure that they protected your privacy and respected your wishes and your engagement?
In the olden days, that was the opt-out box, was it?
It is the opt-out box. It's exactly that.
Okay.
What then happens is that you've got consent, and the consent doesn't necessarily relate back to privacy, because as a customer, if I've purchased from you, I've got transactional history and records which they need to keep, and they're not going to be deleting or moving away from.
And they need that as part of their business, I guess.
Absolutely. So there's a requirement on a legal level in terms of some of the data and some of the processes that you need to be able to acquire. But then from a consensual perspective, how do you now stop pushing emails or targeting people
Yes.
on ad platforms, and what are the processes that you have in place to be able to do that? And because of there's a lot of debate around whether it's the technology's responsibility or the client's responsibility and how they manage it and that. So what is coming down the track is that Google specifically is going to stop allowing people to track people through their platforms with third-party cookies, which is one of the cookie kind of environments. And that's going to have a massive impact on businesses globally. So already you can see a lot of our clients are now going, what is that impact going to be? What is it impact in terms of my marketing? What is the impact in terms of my data and the way that I manage data? And that can be significantly kind of detrimental. So I mean, one of the clients that we're working with, 30% of their media spend is no longer going to be able to deliver the same value that it was. Now for them, that's literally millions of
30%.
Was from a media perspective, but also from an acquisition perspective.
Wow.
It's a massive impact. So there needs to be some thinking and some process around, what are you doing? How do you manage your technology? How do you manage your acquisition? And then also the other piece, and that comes back to the original question you asked me, was around how do people engage with their customers? And those companies that think about the ethics and about how they want to be seen and the right thing to do, it becomes amazing how customers respond back to that. So what we're seeing is that it's not just risk and governance from a legal and a compliance perspective, but actually where we start having really good conversations with clients is when they start going, what are the things that we want our customers to know us for, that we behave in the right way, that we do the right thing. We're seeing that customers are rewarding those businesses with, I now trust you because you've told me what you're going to be doing and you stick to that process. I'm much more happier to kind of engage with you and trust you and give you my data, which allows the business to be more effective in the way that they engage and expand their product set or their engagement with them accordingly. So
which
it's interesting.
Moves absolutely to the ethic
bit
of the end game.
Absolutely. And I think that's kind of going to be the next kind of wave in terms of, it's not just about compliance and behavior. It's going to be about, what do you do as a business and how do you relate that back to the things that you do? And we're seeing it in other spheres. If you think about, the pressure in terms of companies, in terms of what do their board structures look like,
yes.
and how are they kind of restructuring and thinking the diversity within the boards across their businesses. It's those same principles that they need to be applying into the way that they behave and how they kind of look at that. and putting things in place to make sure that they're continually updating and looking at it. There was a conference I attended the other day that was fascinating in that the algorithms that we are creating, just in the people that create them, create bias in the way that we look at things. So that you've got to now start looking at all those kind of factors in terms of how we think about the data, how we mine it, how we look at customers, and then how we respond to them. So it's a fascinating kind of area of the business.
Wow. So and you operate across a number of time zones.
So we do. Well, actually, not necessarily, because Arabia and Africa is only within an hour to 2 hours of us. So it's actually quite a nice kind of niche within how we work. And what it does is it allows us to start bringing in that diversity. So we've got teams that are not necessarily purely based in one location. We are, and through COVID, we've been doing this since we started the business, but through COVID, it's now become much more acceptable for people to have multiple people and multiple teams, and that creates the diversity in thinking and opportunity in terms of the way that you work and the way that you the solutions that you provide and the input that you get. And I think having that diversity has been kind of key in terms of opening up some of the opportunities and discussions with clients and how we've taken those forward.
It really is fascinating how the dynamics just in the last 2 years have hit all businesses, regardless. There are obviously some businesses that are going to do well. In diversity, there's always going to be that. But I'm fascinated to hear a little bit more, if you wouldn't mind,
sure,
about how you're planning for 2022 and beyond in terms of, you talked about the privacy, data and the ethics. What about the sort of the wider getting past the pandemic? Do you feel that that's starting to come? I certainly feel that in London, in the UK, I feel like we've almost turned a corner, literally within days, but I don't know whether the rest of the world have done.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think once again, like what we're seeing is it depends on the industries. So certain industries are definitely kind of already going, we're kind of back and we're starting to engage. What's been fascinating is seeing how our clients are kind of planning for that, and that affects how we have to plan for it as well. So
because you have huge customers,
yep,
who are huge businesses in themselves, might be diverse, but across all sectors, I'm guessing.
And we do, and what you're seeing is that they're planning because they're obviously a lot more cautious in terms of like going back to work and all those kind of things. So what we're seeing is that a lot of people are now starting to go, what we're going to do is we'll keep our offices closed. They've realized that work from home is something, if you'd spoken to them 3 years ago, they would have gone, it's impossible, we can't do this. And now they've got a lot of teams have just been told, we're expecting you back in the office in June or July. So there's no immediate pressure. And as the teams are starting to go back to the office, I think people are also trying to find this kind of balance between, what time do they spend in the office and where's that value versus what time are they spending in terms of non-commuting and kind of that. I think the biggest issue that we're looking at is in terms of as we move back into a more normalized kind of environment is some of the mental health issues that we think are going to come down the track. I think being in the environments that we've been in and looking at that, I think there are still going to be a lot of issues that we're going to have to deal with in terms of, people that don't want to come back, and the kind of caution is maybe a word that people are still going to be. There's always that diffusion of innovation, right?
Sure.
So there's a portion of them that are going to be like, I'm back in the office tomorrow,
sure.
and there's going to be a whole portion of people that are going, I'm not sure that I want to be back, and what am I exposing myself to, and that sort of thing. And I think businesses are going to be challenged in terms of balancing kind of the conversation between those people and how much pressure do you put on them, and what is the value of being back in the office, or is that going to be back in? We are looking that people will, my expectation is I think over time people will move back to more of a commute, but that depends on the industry and it depends on the requirements in terms of where they're at. So it's going to be fascinating to see that model and how that's going to pan out. I'm still kind of probably fence sitting on it a little bit on it.
But because it's for both, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we've almost had like a slate clean thing where businesses and individuals, staff members and employees, both are looking at each other, and the employees and staff are looking at the business to sort of do the right thing, but also help them. And the employers are looking at the staff thinking, what do I need to do? What should I be doing? And unfortunately, because the governments have got big things to think about, and people dying and all that sort of stuff, it's a tough call for both sets, and who knows what the right thing is. Nobody knows, but having said that, what I worry about more than anything, and you mentioned it right there, mental health, because my guess is only now will it start to come out about what's happened to people being locked down, being with families during work, seeing loved ones be ill, maybe long COVID.
Yep.
Can you strategize for that?
Well, I think you can put in processes for people to be able to engage, and I think it's also been interesting watching at how businesses have managed the COVID. And I mean, we're an online business, so we work within data, and so a lot of the business moved online. So we weren't based out of having to produce a factory, so I can't comment on how that's going to change.
Sure.
But from what we've seen, what you see is fatigue, not just not from sickness or whatever, but just in terms of like the amount of meetings and how people get fatigued in terms of like being in those meetings and that. And also the other one is that how do you create opportunities for people to connect? And that's been a big kind of play. So, simple things that I think some of the businesses that we've been engaged with and we've learned from them and they've kind of learned from us. And I mean, things like, I'll give you two quick examples. We, one of the teams that I'm aware of, what they do is they do their first meeting on a Monday, which is their normal stand-up and what the week's holding and whatever else. They do it as a walking meeting.
Walking meeting?
Yeah.
So they walk around the block?
So everybody is in their own location, so you might be at home or whatever, and it kind of works better in summer than in winter. Okay. But what they do is they actually do a walking meeting. So everyone is walking, and then they do it through their mobile phones. And chatting to the manager went, benefit is everybody's out and having a walk. But he said what was amazing is that the response is that they weren't stuck at home. They weren't in the same environments. They were outside for half an hour or 40 minutes or whatever the call was. Wow. And he said the other big thing for them was that they had focused attention because they didn't have somebody looking at a TV, their kind of PC screen, and then working on their mobile or distracted by the thing. So they had very good kind of concentration for that meeting.
Because it's so easy to do that, isn't it?
Absolutely. So I think they've kind of learned. And then one of the things that we did is we kind of realized that, and we put in a session once a week. And the session's rules are you're not allowed to talk about work. Wow. So you arrive at the meeting, and we called it tea time because it was the middle of one of the days during the week, and you had to come with a cup of tea or a cup of coffee, and you weren't allowed to talk about work. You could talk about your holiday, you could talk about an issue of the day, whatever it was. Sure. And it was amazing because what you see from the numbers is that was one of the best attended meetings because people were just. It was a bit of time out. It was a bit of kind of connect with some of your colleagues, find out what's happening in their world, have a chat, and I don't think we do enough of that.
No, sure.
So it comes back to the
in pre-pandemic, that would be a natural occurrence in the office that nobody had to govern or set a parameter for. Just as you bump into somebody in the corridor, at the
water cooler talk, right?
Yeah,
it's exactly that. I mean, it's like it's exactly. Or I'm popping out to go get a bite to eat, and to people and it's all of that kind of engagement that I think we've missed. And as people it's been really interesting. I mean, we started kind of moving back into the office before we were the current requirement of if you work from home, stay at home. But in that, the comments that were coming back from people were like, kind of a little bit nervous about coming into the office, but actually it's been amazing because I suddenly had 5 conversations today that were 5 minutes each, and they resolved issues where I now know things and aware of things that I wouldn't have been aware. That's brilliant.
Wow.
And I think it's that balance that is going to be interesting to see. And as you say, strategies behind that are going to be interesting to see what businesses come up with and how they kind of progress that and do that. Mm-hmm. And I think at the same time, consumers are going to start changing because consumers are starting to move out of their homes again. So the home delivery and all those things will stay, but now they, that pressure back onto customers is going to be very interesting in terms of like they're looking for experiences. They're not looking to go, shopping is an experience, but they're not going to do their shopping because that's going to be delivered. So what is that pressure that's going to be put onto the businesses in terms of how are they going to engage and, kind of define that experience and deliver that. So I think there's a lot more complexity that we're not completely aware of that's going to be coming back into our businesses.
And of course, you guys have 2 issues and problems to look at, because not only have you got that going on in your business, but you've got to then think about the clients, because you're running their campaigns and talking to them about their businesses developing and growing, because you're there. They've invested time and effort and money with you guys to help them do exactly that. So it's a double whammy for you guys.
Well, I think it's an opportunity, not a double whammy. Okay. And I think part of that is really around how effectively you start thinking about the data within your business, because a lot of businesses that we go speak to, that they've kind of traditionally just tracked and done things in certain ways or in certain processes, and what they're starting to realize is there's a whole lot more data in the world available today than what there was last year versus the year before. I mean, the data doubles every 2 years. So and what's interesting around that kind of engagement is that as you start thinking about your data sets, what it does is it gives you more insights into who your customers are and how effective you are in terms of talking to them and what you do with them. And I think that process is really is going to supersize. So the companies that are doing well from a data and an insights perspective, and then start combining interesting data, that's where they're going to start tracking the differences in terms of their customers and how they behave. And that changes the way that you start thinking about your customer experience and the way you design, the way that you communicate, or the way that you engage with customer. And you can start measuring and tracking that in a far more succinct kind of enabled way. So when you say that's what's going to happen, I think if you're on top of your data, if you understand where those data points are, you will actually be able to capitalize on a lot of opportunity. If you're not, then there are going to be some things that you're probably going to miss out on because you're not going to have that immediate insight or that immediate engagement that would be, that would deliver that insight. And as you said, you can take 2 businesses within the pandemic. One has maximized and the other one hasn't, and it's just the way that they've responded. Lots of people use the word agile and all sorts of other kind of jargon that to me it's just about the way you respond and your ability to kind of see the opportunity and then to maximize it.
Brilliant. Okay, so that's fascinating, Richard. One of the things that you mentioned when we were talking earlier, you talked about measurement. Can you just elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time when we go speak to clients, they are kind of data rich but measurement or insights poor. Okay. And where we kind of look at that is how effectively are you combining different data sets to be able to create insights around your business. And often it's just based on the silos that you have within the business, because you have an events team that will tell you that we did a great event because we got all these people and we did all those things. And we have a marketing team that will tell you that all this product went out and content went out, and you have, a social media team, but often in smaller businesses, it tends to be those teams are either combined into one environment, or alternatively, but as you get into the bigger kind of businesses, what you do is you have these silos, and they're not tied up as effectively as what they probably should be. So, they've got their own KPIs and their own measurements, but they haven't kind of gone, who's the core customer? How do you put the customer at the center? And did the customer that attended that event get that piece of content? And did that actually map out and deliver the value that you should have been looking for? And did that result in a sale? Now, you've probably got a sales team that are going, we're up on sales. Sure. But tying that data set together becomes, and more businesses are now starting to look at that. They're going like, how effective are we in terms of that conversation and understanding? And that's B2B and business to consumer. So, it doesn't really matter which environment you're in. It's really about how do we do that and drive that engagement in a much more effective mechanism. And that then becomes interesting because you start then going and talking to senior executives and you go, what are your dashboards?
Sure.
And a lot of them understand the business, but they haven't really kind of taken it into the next level of going, what are my daily dashboards that I'm looking at? How effective is the business running? And what do I need to know, or what data do I need to start pulling? And what you find is that there's this kind of maturity curve that you get into. As soon as you start measuring that, then you go, well, what happens if? And what if I add that data? Wow. And what if I do this? And there's this amazing kind of growth that you see within the business because they suddenly start looking at the data in different ways and understanding their own engagement in very different ways. And that then allows you to start gaining those insights and that kind of engagement that starts to drive better innovation, better engagement within the business and those kind of things, which is critical to, driving forward and putting value back into the business accordingly. So I think measurement is, we speak about customer data, but I also think that measurement and data within the businesses are going to change fundamentally. And I think that will drive a lot of engagement and growth for business if it's done in the right way and through the right people.
Fascinating.
Cool.
Richard, thank you so much for coming in today. Absolutely wonderful to meet you. Some of the insights that you've given us and the listeners today, sensational. Thank you so much.
Mike, thanks for the opportunity.
Thanks, Richard.
Okay.